gonna get started here in just 1 second, just waiting for Facebook to boot up. Okay. All right. I think we're live. All right. Welcome, welcome, welcome everyone. My name is Tina. I am a happiness coach. If this is your first time joining, if you're on TikTok, make sure you tap the screen, share the live. What I do is I help people go from being anxious, depressed, in a dark place to being happy. And I do this by sharing my experience, strength, and hope, and the tools that I actually use to help myself get out of these situations. So tonight's topic that we're going to be talking about is how to get yourself out of a toxic situation. And I don't know how many times people will often look at circumstances from the outside, looking into a situation and kind of go, well, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just go? It's like, or why do they keep going back to the same old behavior when they know it's not good, right? And what I'm going to talk about today is a lot about the situation, what goes on behind the scenes in an abusive environment. And while everybody else can see maybe the physical violence, the fighting, the blow-ups, all of those kind of things that could be happening, what they don't see is how it started. And it's not, so from an outside perspective, it's like, damn, like, why would you put up with that? And what they don't see is how it gradually escalated so that you're pretty much desensitized through the whole process to the point where stuff that is clearly toxic to somebody from the outside will look at the situation and kind of go, dude, you're standing in fire. What's going on? And you're like, no, I'm fine. It's really good. I'm okay. It's not that big of a deal, right? And it's because there's a whole desensitization process that happens as you're living in a toxic environment. And it's a gradual effect. And I'm going to tie this not only to personal stuff and be able to give ideas and tips on how you can escape from those kind of situations, but also too to talk about how this happens within business, because a lot of times it's not the things that are glaringly obvious problems that are setting off the fire alarms. Those ones all get addressed, those are the problems that blow up that everybody focuses on, and it gets that attention, and nobody takes the time to deal with the smaller, subtle problems that will eventually blow up. So if those things aren't addressed, then what ends up happening, it's that story of, if you try to put a frog in boiling water, it's going to jump out. But if you set it in lukewarm water and gradually increase the heat, it's going to sit in that water and cook to death. Right? So this is kind of what happens in an abusive environment, in a toxic environment. So whether that is an abusive environment like I grew up in, where there was drinking, alcoholism, fighting, violence, sexual abuse, all of that kind of stuff that happened in my childhood, you become accustomed to a certain level of toxicity, and it ends up not phasing you. It doesn't even register because this becomes normal, and it's only after you kind of grow up and then you hear of somebody else's child and you're like, wait, what? You didn't go through this? How is this possible, right? It doesn't really register. And I remember the first time I shared something with somebody who had never experienced any of that kind of, they had both of their parents, they came from a loving home. I'm sure there were still issues, right? No home is perfect. But when I shared just a tiny little piece, I didn't even think it was a big deal. Like the absolute look of shock and horror on her face when it just kind of confused me. I'm like, oh, okay. You had a bad childhood as well. Ryan, I I'm not going to argue with professionals that do diagnose that stuff, and I'm not qualified to be able to argue that. In my experience, people can heal. So, whatever label they've given you of a diagnosis, I want you to know that there are things that you can do to change. I've seen people that have been extremely bad, extremely. They would be considered narcissistic, they'd be considered hopeless cases that cannot be helped. And I have seen miracles happen. I have seen people change their lives, become better people. So what I want you to know that it is possible as long as you're willing to do the work. Okay, Ryan? Yeah, nobody knows what goes on behind the closed doors, right? And that's the thing, is the families that it happens to is usually the ones it looks so good on the outside. Everything seems okay. Our family was one of those. Both parents were working. We kept our house good. It's not like it was in ruin and disrepair. Yeah. That's good. That's good. Keep your ego low, thankful every day. Gratitude is always an excellent practice. And just know that change is possible. It always frustrates me when people say that, there are certain behaviors, it's like, well, they can't really be changed. They can't change any of that stuff. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that. All humans are designed to be changed. We are designed to be programmed, and if we've been programmed to live a certain way, or we've reacted a certain way because of the circumstances that we've been in, if you go back and you start to look at those things, you can actually change those things if you have the correct support behind you to do that, and you are willing to actually do the work. And by work, I mean the emotional work. It needs to correct what should have been done in the first place. Okay? And I understand the concept of ego, and that's a great thing. I just want to caution on that too, to not be so hard on yourself. It's like that, because when people say that, oh, I have to keep my ego low, to me that feels like blaming the victim of what you've been through. You've developed certain coping mechanisms, certain adaptive styles because of what you've been through. Nobody becomes a sociopath or any of these things if they haven't been through trauma. And there is a way to actually heal this stuff and be a good person, live a good life, feel happy. It is possible, okay? So we're going to talk about what it takes to get out of an environment like this, okay? Because here's the problem. You can't really leave a toxic environment if you don't feel good enough and have the self-esteem within yourself to be able to leave, but you can't get self-esteem in a toxic environment. It actually wears your self-esteem down. So it makes it this vicious cycle where you doubt yourself, you can't get out. Plus, if there's any fear of violence or physical abuse, like what happened in our household, that, you fear for your own life. And if that's the case, I want to encourage you to try and do whatever you can to have some sort of safety, escape plan, something like that. Kind of think of it like a fire escape kind of thing, right? So have people around you that you can contact that should you need to escape. Where can you take the kids if you have kids? What is it that you need to do to be able to break free from this situation, okay? It's not easy, it's scary, but it can be done. Now, that's a pretty extreme example, and I want to kind of bring it back down, because even trying to get the self-esteem necessary to do that kind of breakaway is next to impossible. So today we're going to talk about some of the smaller ways that you can start to build your own self-worth, even if you are in a toxic environment, okay? Excuse me. Um, so one of the things I want to talk about is how when you're in an abusive environment, what it does is it keeps you in a constant state of threat. And when you're in a constant state of threat or fear, what it does is physiologically, it narrows your perspective. You see a very narrow focus. You cannot have a broad perspective. You do not see solutions that are probably right beside you because you're under such attack, okay? And that could be emotional, physical, mental, spiritual. Those kind of attacks happen, and because of that we end up narrowing our scope. We can't see what's right in front of us. It's like a fog rolls in, and it prevents us from taking some of those steps forward that would actually help us escape from this situation. Okay, so for example, one of the things that ends up happening in situations that are abusive is that there's some money issues. Okay, so money issues can be a huge deterrent, right? So if you grew up in poverty, that in and of itself is a trauma thing. It's one of the questions on the ACEs test, which is adverse childhood experiences. To be under the threat of seeing your parents in poverty, you living in poverty, create certain mindsets, and children often take those experiences on themselves. Hey David, I see you on Facebook, welcome. So children take that on themselves. Like myself, I tried to offer to solve the bill problem. Like I saw my mom constantly stressed out, and her and the abuser were always fighting about money and not having enough money, and they were arguing about, you spent this, you bought grapes and grapes are too expensive. And it's like, so these weren't like lavish kind of things. It's not like we were out buying Louis Vuitton purses and stuff like that, or like crazy designer stuff. It was like, you bought grapes, how fucking dare you, right? And it's like, but it's Christmas time, so I wanted the kids to have some grapes. So it was one of those kind of things that there were always these stupid fights. And me as a child, I would often jump in trying to solve problems that were technically outside of the scope of my skill set. That didn't matter because I saw that my mom was always emotionally upset. So those kind of things, they end up leaving certain mindsets within you, and they do end up affecting you in adulthood. Now, some people can go one of two ways. They're so affected by the poverty that they've been in that they are relentless with being able to break that, right? Because it was so painful for them to go through that, that they often end up becoming very, very rich, which isn't a bad coping mechanism, to be honest. However, the other side is you end up, so oftentimes you either side with the abuser or you side with the victim. And it's often more empowering if you side with the abuser. However, it starts to damage you internally and mindset, spiritually, and all these kind of things. And eventually you end up having to confront those kind of things, right? Money issues. So if you're in a situation where money is hard to come by, you are not able to access it, there's never enough money to pay the bills, you're stressed about it, the people around you are stressed about it, all of those kind of things. This can be really, really challenging. And you're going to think I'm absolutely batshit crazy, which may not be far from the truth. However, again, these are things that I put into practice for myself. So, when I am in a situation where I'm feeling a great amount of lack, where I don't feel like I have enough, I will deliberately go out of my way to give to somebody else who is in a less fortunate place. Because despite what we went through, I used to joke and say we were kind of like from the trailer park. We were like trailer park trash, but we were the high end of the trailer park trash. So like we were hoity-toity, highfalutin kind of people. until I started meeting some other people, and it's like, oh, damn. And it's like, it would be little things like, these little mindsets would creep in. It's so like I had this coffee travel mug that I took into work with me, and it's like it was still functional. The cup itself was good, didn't leak, didn't do anything. It was like my favorite cup. But all of the paint and the design on it had come up, and it looked like I picked it out of the garbage can, but I never really paid attention to that. I just didn't really notice those kind of things until I was in a higher end corporate job, and I had this cup with me, and I had it on the table. And I remember when the manager was made some sort of comment, and I was like, I never really noticed, because he pointed out, it's like, Tina, don't you think you should maybe buy a new cup? And I'm like, why? It works fine. So I have this whole mindset around, if it's practical, it's functional, it doesn't matter if it looks okay, it's still usable. It's kind of like, so we would always pick these things out of the, we always had hand-me-downs, we always picked things out of garage sales, or even on garbage day. My uncle would go around on garbage day seeing what kind of treasures he could find. These were normal kind of things. This is just how we grew up. So, and of that, I still felt incredibly blessed for the things that we did have, because the few times that I did babysitting, which were actually horrible for me, I babysat for this really young couple. They were really poor. Their place was a disaster. Like, I mean, they had garbage and everything piled up in the house, and there were dirty diapers, and I remember trying to clean up for them, and they like a bunch of bugs and everything, and it's like, I'm here caring for these children in this situation, and I was heartbroken from it. So poverty can be a really huge traumatic trigger, and knowing that there's always somebody else out there that's worse off than you, no matter which situation that you're in, and because of that, knowing that you can still give to somebody else. And even if you don't have something monetary to give, you can give your time, you can give your attention, you can give your encouragement, you can give your support. You can do all of those kind of things that actually help. It doesn't cost you anything to offer a kind word of encouragement, to reach out and see how somebody's doing. And even if you can't change the situation, encouraging them that they can change their situation, believing in them, is huge, because without that belief that something can change, and sometimes you have to borrow somebody else's belief to feel like you can actually make the change. So when you are giving that encouragement to somebody else, even if you feel like you're filling from an empty cup, doing that fills them up, and that energy comes back to you, because it's not the love that we receive that actually fills us up. It's not the love that we get. It's not all the things that we get that make us feel the most fulfilled. It is the stuff that we actually give. Now, I'm not saying only give and never receive, because then you're denying the people who do love you, who do care for you, the opportunity to give back to you, because it feels really, really good when you actually make a difference in somebody's life. And so doing acts of service can help start to build that belief in yourself, that self-esteem that you need in order to be able to feel worthy to leave a toxic situation. Okay? So, and I call this getting out of self. Okay? So when we step outside of ourselves, we put our own personal challenges aside and know that there's somebody else out there that will probably kill for our situation. And I'm not saying that to diminish anything that you're going through, because one of the challenges that I had, I was going to a group for a while, and I actually took the things that we were being taught in the group and I actually applied them to my life. And guess what? My friggin' life got a whole lot better. But it doesn't matter what level you're at, there are always still problems. You will still have emotions, you will still have feelings. And just because everything looks perfect on the outside, you can still feel sad, you can still feel upset about things, you can still feel angry, and somebody else can look at you and go, must be nice to have your friggin' life. And that's exactly what happened to me in this group that I was getting a whole lot of support from, and getting picked on for those kind of things because I applied it, and I was, even though I was still allowed to be in the group because I had been through the experiences, I was no longer living in that kind of life, and my life got a whole lot better. It improved, I was happy, all of those kind of things. And that's when people come and they try to pull you back down, right? It's like, oh, must be nice that you're doing so much better. You know, I still have this problem that, you know, what you go to the group for. And it's like, okay. And instead of getting that encouragement, they gave the attack kind of thing. And it's fear. So it was a cry for love from that person. But that being said, it also ended up that it wasn't just that person. That person started talking, and then everybody's looking at me like, well, you got everything together, why are you even here, right? So I kind of got pushed out of the group a little bit. Now, if I really wanted to, I could have fought and stayed, but instead I decided to agree with them, and I left a toxic situation. That being said, my years in those groups were extremely powerful, transformative, and really made a big difference in my life. So that's one of the ways. So money issues. So if you have these money issues, being able to start with just being able to encourage other people to donate. So when, you know, you're at the store and they ask you if you want to give that $2 donation, or if you want to do the, you know, the top up to the dollar or whatever it is, do that, right? Do those little things, knowing that the more that you're able to let go of that, whatever you send out to the universe is going to come back to you tenfold. It may not come back from who you think it's going to come back from, but it will come back to you. And having that sort of faith that there's an energy reciprocation that happens. And it might be a long time before you see that energy reciprocated. Thank you so much, Peter. I appreciate the roses. So being able to give that out is one of the small ways that you can start. And it also doesn't get on the radar of the abuser, because what are they going to say when all you're doing is encouraging somebody? You know, so those kind of things. Now, sometimes abusers will limit your access to outside people because they will see that you start to feel better. So be careful of those kind of things. If that's the case, the tool that I would use is developing a connection with a higher power, spiritually, whether that's God, the universe, whatever it is. I don't care if you pray to the doorknob on your door, right? Doesn't matter. I resisted any form of spirituality or any of that kind of stuff in the beginning, until I was dared basically to kind of prove it wrong. So I was like, okay, fine, I'll go through the stupid experiment, and I will, you know, pray, and I will ask for guidance, and I will ask for assistance and see what happens. And it's like, oh, okay. After a couple of weeks of doing this, I'm like, oh, things actually did start to get better. I didn't feel so bad. So whether it's real or imagined, I don't really care. It works. It's effective. So whether there's a big spaghetti God or Jesus or any of that kind of stuff, and I'm saying this because I do believe in Jesus, I do go to church, but recently I've gone back to church. I'm not gonna try to portray something that I'm not. I've recently gone back to church. I've actually enjoyed it. So I'm trying to speak to people who possibly don't believe in this stuff, because I didn't. I didn't believe in this kind of stuff. I didn't want to hear about it. That was all woo-woo. It was all weird and constrictive, all of those kind of things. I was much more science, logic. Give me that kind of stuff. Give me something I can actually believe, prove. I need to see it in order to believe it. The problem is the thing with belief is you actually have to believe that something is possible in order for it to come into reality for you. And there's times where I really hate this principle and I know it's right, but I still fight it. So here's the example. So I knew when I was going through some of my darkest times as a child, and I would sit in that apartment windowsill in the middle of the night when I'm supposed to be sleeping, and then they wonder why I wouldn't wake up in the morning. But either way, I would stay up really late at night, and I would sit and I'd look at other families, and I would use my imagination to believe that there was something that could be better, right? And I remember somebody sharing a story one time of two guys in a hospital room, and the one guy was closer to the window, and he was able to describe to the other guy who couldn't get to the window what he saw out there. And he described this beautiful park and trees and birds, and there were people walking, and he just painted this beautiful picture for him, and just told him stories of what was going on just as entertainment for this other guy that was bedridden and couldn't get out of the bed. So he just told inspiring stories to the guy of what he saw outside the window, just to kind of cheer him up. And eventually this guy ended up passing away, and so when he passed away, the guy that was in the bed away from the window asked if he could be moved over to the window. And when he got moved over to the window, he looked out the window, and all he saw was a brick wall. So this is how powerful the imagination was. So all of that stuff that the guy was telling him wasn't actually true, but it was enough to build his belief to help him feel better. So we can all do this kind of stuff by finding ways to build our belief, to allow us to feel better in a situation that maybe is not ideal, that maybe we don't have the ability to get out of today, but knowing that we will get out, and repeating that kind of stuff, like I did in the windowsill, that I just have to get through this. It's going to be okay one day. It's going to be okay one day. And knowing that that was going to happen. I didn't know how. I had no power. I had no ability. Every time I tried to run away from home, I got dragged back. All of those kind of things, right? So those were challenges, and it makes it really, really tough. It's kind of, you get this conditioning that in your childhood that you cannot leave a situation that is not good for you. Why? Because a lot of times you're told that the stuff that you're going through isn't a big deal, or it's not even real. That's called gaslighting, right? So if you see something happen, or like I did, I told what had happened to me, and it was like, no, you've misunderstood it. You're making a big deal out of nothing. Did it really happen like that? I'm sure it's not that bad, right? So all of these things, you get these messages that are conditioned, and it's done not just when there's overt abuse. Sometimes it's done with small things. Sometimes it's done at the dinner table. Sometimes it's done in just little snide comments that you don't really pick up on. Hey Metro, welcome. So that's the thing with abusive environments. By the time it gets to where there's violence or sexual abuse or verbal abuse, there's always been some lead up to that. So once it's like, seeing those things is the tip of the iceberg. And a lot of times people will deal with the tip of the iceberg, not realizing that there's this whole other mound of ice underneath that needs to be healed in order for you to actually be free. So oftentimes we cut off the tip of the iceberg and we think, oh, I should be good now. I don't see any ice, and meanwhile just underneath the surface there's all this issues. And all it takes is to be in a time of drought where the water levels kind of go down and you're like, oh shit, there's all this other stuff under here and I got to deal with that. And that's what's happened to me in the past couple of years. It's like there was, even though I had done a lot of healing work, my entire 20s was spent in healing and recovery, that there were new things that surfaced as I got to a different level, as I started to deal with bigger challenges. And I realized I had to work through a whole bunch of new issues. So understanding that in order to get out of the situation that you're in, you need to start to find ways to build the belief within yourself that it is possible. And that can be you can do that by reading stories of other people. Yes, God is definitely a huge component to this. Believing in a power greater than yourself, okay? That is possible to have a miracle happen, and believing that a miracle is possible not just for other people, but it's possible for you, that you can get out of those situations, that you can make the changes, and that whatever strength that you need, whatever skills that you need, that God is going to be able to bring those people into your life to be able to help you. The catch is we have to be able to look for that and know that as we start to focus on that there is a solution. So instead of this will never change, it's always the way it is, and this is just my life, if you find yourself telling yourself that, I want you to switch it to there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a better way to live. There's got to be something more than this. Doing that is going to start to reprogram your mind to start looking for solutions. Yeah, letting go and leaving an abused relationship, it's really challenging to do that kind of stuff. And sometimes I know some of the situations that I've been in, sometimes it was pulling the Band-Aid off and then you get sucked back in, you leave and you come back, those kind of things. And the going back, it means you still had unfinished business. There was something there that you still needed to let go of. And then once you do, it's easier to be able to leave, okay? It's never an easy thing. And a lot of times there's all these fears and doubts of whether or not it's the right thing. And this can be not even just in, I'm going to give an example of a work environment. Say you've been with a company, so the first time I left a company, I had been with that company for 10 years. I grew up there. Everything I knew was there. What if I go to another company and it's worse? And, or what if I can't do it? Or what if I lose my job and I had this great job that I had been at for 10 years? And it gets really, really scary when you go to make changes like that. And here's the thing. I did go to a new job. I got paid more money, and it was way worse than I could have ever imagined. But that being said, because I had a solid foundation to build from, I actually grew quite a bit. And all of those challenges, all of those things that I faced actually made me really, really strong. And because I had a good deal of recovery under my belt, I was able to deal with those challenges in a more effective way than if I had started out in that environment. I would have been like, oh my God, this is a terrible place. But because of that, because I was strong enough, because of the therapy that I had done, because of the inner work that I had done, I was able to deal with those challenges a whole lot more effectively and be able to grow from them instead of getting beaten back down. Okay? So that is the benefit of being able to do that inner work, of being aware of those kind of things, and knowing that when you're in those high threat environments, and knowing that if you grew up in an abusive home, you're often, what that does, it removes your access to appropriate tools that you were either never given or never shown the appropriate tools. So it's basically like you learn to cope in maladaptive ways. So this could be through addictions, this could be through becoming aggressive like the abuser, this could be becoming a people pleaser so you don't get abused, all of those kind of things. And it's basically like going through life, and you know that there are screws that you have to tighten and stuff like that, but you have never ever seen a screwdriver before, and all you have is a butter knife. And so you make do and you figure out how to get shit done with screwing all the screws, tightening them, loosening them, using a butter knife, and you manage to cope. But somebody else comes along and goes, "What the hell are you doing?" And you're like, "What? I'm tightening the screw." And they're like, "Why aren't you using a screwdriver?" And you're like, "What's a screwdriver? I didn't know that there's a tool that I could use? There's a different way that I could do this? Well, shit, nobody told me that." And so sometimes it's a matter of starting to learn what some of these tools are in order for us to be able to build that self-esteem that we need to be able to leave toxic environments. And so this often comes from building that belief, and building that belief within ourselves, and knowing that sometimes other people have that answer. So connecting with other people, which can be challenging when you are growing up in an abusive environment. I know there was this young guy that I had met at school. I brought him home, and it was a really, really bad reaction that ended up happening. And because of that situation, I was horrified by the way the abuser treated him. And he treated him particularly bad. And this guy was so sweet. He was so nice and kind. And he went to the Baptist church, and he brought me over to his place with his family, and we had dinner and stuff like that. And I was like in grade 3, so it's not like this whole dating thing, right? But my abuser took that as a threat because somebody else was paying attention to me, and that wasn't allowed. And so he shamed the guy in front of me. The poor guy never came back. And I was so horrified that I never brought another friend home after that. And I most certainly didn't bring any girlfriends home to my house because I didn't want anything like what was going on with me to happen to them. So consequently, and I'm just realizing this now, I'm like, that could also be part of why I hung around with guys most of the time. And I also wanted to learn how to be stronger, because if I could learn to fight, then maybe I could fight off the abuser, right? So I hung out with guys a lot to feel stronger and stuff like that. And I did that even into my work career, where I went into a male-dominated field and I learned to be strong. My mom always wanted to be strong. She wanted to be a mechanic, but girls weren't allowed to be a mechanic. That was a boy job when she was younger. So she always held that. Hey, Em, welcome. So there's things that we end up creating maladaptive coping mechanisms, tools, skill sets. I'm doing well, how are you? We develop these tools and coping mechanisms and skill sets that are not as effective. And it's a matter of starting to learn. It's like, oh, first of all, a screwdriver exists, and it's a better tool than using a butter knife to tighten or loosen a screw. Yes, I'm from Canada. So when you have these things that you go through, you can start to learn what those tools are, apply them a lot better. And this, I wanted to talk about how this sometimes translates into business, because oftentimes we get used to certain ways of doing things. It wasn't big enough to be a head-on problem that you needed to address, so it ended up being something that was dismissed, and you're always dealing with the big burning fires. And this happens in business all the time, and the little things never get addressed until they become a big burning fire. And I get that because there's so many things going on in a business, but at some point you need to do some sort of clean sweep of understanding what are the things that, the little niggly things that we haven't been dealing with, that we know are problems, but we're not focusing on those. When we start to look at those kind of things, then we can prevent things from becoming big burning fires. And oftentimes it is your quieter people on the team that tend to be really good at spotting these smaller problems and dealing with those things. And this is why, another reason why these quieter people, when they actually leave, you find out they did a whole lot more and you didn't realize, because they're dealing with all these tiny little things that prevented bigger problems from happening. And there's no KPIs to really measure their value, their worth for that kind of stuff. So be careful with that, because you can end up creating a toxic work environment by not paying attention to the little things, because you can't get to full-blown physical violence in a household without there also being some emotional issues that were not addressed, and then they blow up, right? Same thing in your business. There's all these little issues not addressed, and then all of a sudden you have a big burning fire. Now you gotta drop whatever it is you're doing, and you're running from pillar to post trying to figure out what it is that needs to be fixed, and there's always just one more big problem. The way to start to slow down and look at these smaller problems is the way that you can start preventing a lot of the bigger problems from happening. Okay? And that often requires some sort of, because if not, what ends up happening, you end up having to bring in a change management professional, which I am certified in, but you have to bring in one of those kind of people to help diagnose what's going on, because now all of these, nobody can pinpoint what the main problem is. And every time you try to go solve the problem, you can't quite get to the root cause of it, because it's not just one root. There's multiple little roots, and it's just dug in to the fiber and the culture of your business. And that ends up creating this toxic environment, and you're like, why isn't things working? It used to work. And this happens whether it's a sales team, whether it's in logistics and operations, whether it's warehousing. I've seen this happen over and over and over again, that all the focus gets put on the big problems, which I agree that needs to be done. You have to deal with the burning fires, obviously. But nobody wants to take the time to, okay, once the fire's out, let's go back, let's look at this. It's like, well, I'm kind of tired, and it's not that big of a problem right now. It's like, oh, you're making a mountain out of a molehill. And this ends up invalidating the people that are bringing this up. They're like, okay, well, you asked me to wait because you were putting out a fire. I've waited, and now you're not giving me the time of day. You're minimizing the issues that I was bringing up that were causing me regular problems. And that ends up breeding resentment, ill feelings, all of this kind of stuff. And next thing you know, your employees have this attitude problem. Where did this come from? And then leaders will end up labeling their team as toxic and stuff, stupid stuff like that, which is not a good thing. So take the ownership, look at what needs to be corrected, take the time to, whether it's even once a quarter, twice a year, something like that, and deal with, okay, let's put something together to start dealing with these smaller problems and prioritizing them of what could potentially become bigger problems, and taking that time to actually look at it, diagnose it, and figure it out before it becomes a huge problem. And you can do this not only in your business, but in your personal relationship, in your friendships, all those times that you're letting stuff go, thinking, oh, it's no big deal, or that they're in a good mood, I don't want to bring up this issue that was bothering me. These are all things that you are doing that actually contribute to the toxicity that will come down the line later, right? So This is why inner work is so important, because we have to pay attention to what's going on within us to be able to address those things properly and then be able to communicate effectively with those around us, regardless of which environment that we're in. This is also brings me to, just like how I was talking, that when you're in a constant state of threat, it narrows your perspective and it narrows your focus, that you only do what's in front of you, which is perfect if you're in a threatening situation. It is terrible if you're leading your business through fear, because what that does is people will only do what's in front of them. They will not be able to expand their focus to see that there is possibly a better, more effective way of doing this. And it could save you tons of time, tons of money, and because you're operating your business in a state of fear, people can't see the bigger perspective. They can't have that expanded love, energy go into problem solving, because they're under a constant state of threat. And what I mean by this is sometimes what ends up happening is the focus is on such high productivity numbers. Nobody wants to let those numbers slip long enough. For example, I was in a work environment. I had come from another business where we knew about contingency plans of putting things in place so that, if somebody calls in sick, if they were off on vacation, gets hit by a bus, whatever it is, that there was a plan in place, that there was cross-training among the team. And that made perfect sense. But I was working for this person that came from the mindset of, if they have time to cross-train, then they aren't working at 100% capacity, and they need more work on their plate, and we should cut more staff. And I'm like, what? These are not machines. These are human beings. These are human beings. And I fought and I fought and I fought, trying to get him to see a different perspective. And he just refused. Why? Because he was being ruled by fear by the people above him, who thought that the department could be run with 3 people based on the information they were given by the client. It could not. It was not physically possible, and the scope creep that ended up happening as the customer came on board was way more, and it was actually minimum 6 people is how we ended up making it work, but it needed a total of 8 to be on the team. But because there was so much pressure that was being put on him, that he wasn't doing a good job as a manager if he didn't get the staffing down and cutting the cost in that. And he was really good at being able to fight fires, really, really good at being able to fight fires. In a crisis, you could count on him. He'd be there night and day, no problem. But he would never go back and readdress the issues. Once that fire was out, he would never look at the ongoing issues that were happening to prevent another fire from breaking out. So he would only jump into action, be the hero, when there was a big fire. So that leading from fear, so his leaders led him with fear of, if you don't do this, you're going to lose your job. So he doesn't want to lose his job, so he has no choice but to be abusive to the people underneath him as well, by not listening to their ideas, even if he agrees with them. Even if he's like, that is actually a good idea. And I know I was at a company, because he told me afterwards, he was at a company where they did exactly the same thing. There was cross-training so that anybody could slip into that desk and do the dispatching and cover and make sure that the loads got picked up and all of that kind of stuff. So leading with fear, that's an example of how that narrows people's focus. It creates a toxic environment. The people underneath, even though they may not say anything at first, they know that this is total bullshit. They start getting an attitude because they see this stuff. They see nothing changes. And then next thing you know, people are either leaving. So your good people are going to leave first. They're the ones that are like, fuck this shit, I'm out. I can go get another job. I don't need to deal with this. And then the people that are left are the ones that they don't want to try to improve the business. They don't want to, they just want to come in, do their numbers and leave, right? Do their 8 hours and leave. And so that's ended up happening in this environment that I have been in. And that was because of leading from a state of fear instead of a state of love, which is much more expansive. It's looking for solutions rather than focusing only on immediately what's in front of you, because that is a trauma response. But a lot of times people get that what is it? I don't know. I want to say dopamine, but that's not the word that I'm looking for. It's like that they save all their energy for when the attack comes, and then they don't do anything in between because they know that another battle is going to come and they have to conserve all their energy. So then what ends up happening is that they'll beat themselves up saying that they're lazy about stuff, but meanwhile it's still a trauma response, that they're not putting in a certain amount of work because they know a battle is going to come up and they have to be ready to be able to fight that battle when it happens. So when these smaller things are happening, they don't pay attention to it because they're conserving their energy for when the real fight happens. So, and then oftentimes, and this happens predominantly with men, that they will conserve that energy so that they are battle ready. And I've seen this happen over and over and over again. It is a trauma response of not looking at those little things and dealing with them when they're small, because of when they grew up in that environment, they had those battles all the time. I know, I started to do that as well, that I would time how, and I wouldn't react to the small stuff. So like every Saturday night, my mom and the boyfriend that she was with at the time, they would watch wrestling, they would smoke dope, they would drink, and then, you know, you'd hear certain things happening, the noise volume would start to go up, and I knew which stuff to ignore, and I ignored a lot. So they'd fight, they'd bicker, you'd hear things get thrown around a little bit, and it wasn't until, okay, now my mom's crying, now I would go out and I'd stand in between them and I would stop the fight and I would prevent it from escalating further. But I knew what pieces to ignore. They were small, it wasn't a big deal, but I could also time exactly when the fight would break out. And my brother and I developed like a dark sense of humor. It's like, yeah, here we go again. It's, you know, WWE night at the, you know, at the house, and here we go. It's fight night. Let's get ready to rumble. We didn't know that they were going to act it out every Saturday. So those are some of the things that can end up happening when you grow up in an abusive environment. You have this narrow perspective, narrow focus. This can translate to all areas of your life. It prevents you from seeing solutions that are available to you. It prevents you from being able to get out of a toxic environment because you can't see those solutions. You can only see what's in front of you, and it becomes scary to look beyond what it is right in front of us. And so oftentimes we'll tell ourselves, because the most scary things that humans face is the unknown. It's like, well, I don't know what's down that dark tunnel. It could be, you know, it could be the freedom, the light at the end of the tunnel, or it could be another train coming in to smack me down, right? And that was another transport trope we always used to have. So sometimes you develop dark humor when you are in these toxic environments as part of a coping mechanism. And, you know, I've known firefighters that they have some pretty dark humor. As part of the way that they have to cope with the situations and the things that they see on a daily basis. Because their day-to-day job is nonstop trauma, right? That is literally their job. So being able to deal with those things and understand what's going on, finding some strength within ourselves, finding a connection with a power greater than ourselves. So That could be God, it could be a therapist, it could be a coach, it could be, you know, a good friend that you can truly open up to. Reaching out and helping somebody else also helps us get out of self too. So if we're in a situation where we're feeling like we're really down, we're really feeling bad, being able to step out and help somebody else out is another good way. And that can be our time, our attention, our encouragement. Those are things that you can do to help, even if you don't have a whole lot of money, right? So, and if you do, being able to help somebody in a harder position than you is always a good thing, because whatever you give out into this universe will come back to you tenfold. So always try to give out that good energy as much as possible, sharing those positive vibes so that comes back to you in healing energy for yourself, okay? So guys, we're going to wrap this up tonight. If you joined halfway through and you're like, oh man, I really want to listen to the rest of, or the beginning of what Tina was talking about, you can go over to my YouTube channel. It is Coach Tina B 125. I do post the links for the replays on Facebook, on TikTok. You'll see my artwork that I do. I use the artwork as thumbnails. So take a look at my artwork. If you like the artwork, you can order prints or merchandise. It's great ways. Thanks, Peter. It's always good to see you. Thank you so much for the roses. Your biggest supporter. Thank you. I really appreciate you. So check those out. And if not, come back again tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we can go over any topics. If you have particular questions or you're struggling with something in particular that you want me to cover, let me know and I'll do a training for it, and then we'll go from there. Okay, guys? So have a great night, and we will talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.